Yesterday, I went to a indigenous community to meet and get to know the people, and it's an indigenous community that had some recent suicides. So one of my goals here is to be able to give some suicide prevention support and recovery care for folks who've been affected by that. So little by little, though, first I have to gain the people's trust. So yesterday I cleaned up trash and I was very quiet and listened, and I'm learning my Guarani so that I can speak better. So this is kind of a long-term goal, very long-term, to begin to encourage survivors and victims to be able to advocate for themselves. Because even basic things like that you own your body and you have the right to fight back, basic things like that can completely change what happens in a sexual assault situation and culture. Not all of the communities have the same problems. For example, the one community that I went to yesterday was more like, we're going to be addressing more suicide stuff. This other community has a known problem of child sexual abuse, where it's known that basically you're considered old enough to get married at 12 years old, or even sometimes younger, even at like 9, and adult men are allowed to decide when you are ready. You are not allowed to decide. Now, but if you put the power, instead of us coming in and trying to control and rewrite their culture, if you put that power in the hands of the victim and encourage them to be able to have the right to speak up, that's when you can actually change things. So otherwise, the delicacy here is that all that happens otherwise is they kick you out of the community. The case with this particular girl, who they were actually able to bring to the police, and the police, even though they knew who had done the thing, the community wanted to go after the person who had reported, not after the person who had done it. Because it's kind of seen as a betrayal, right? You've betrayed the community, the tribe, quote unquote, if you have dared to report something like that. And because they are a community that's discriminated against or that has experienced colonialism, there is a lot of that, and that doesn't excuse what an abuser might do, but there's a lot of that. I mean, it's similar to what you saw in the military, right? Like if you reported, you were a traitor to the unit, right? So that kind of things make it very complicated for right now. There is a sexual assault medical forensic system in Paraguay, and it's something that I would like to learn more about before I criticize or anything like that. So apparently it sounds like it's extremely busy and overwhelmed, which is, I mean, it's a good thing. At least they have that access. Like in Virginia, there isn't a separate department where you can go and get those kind of things. It's, in fact, a lot of women don't know how to get a forensic exam in Virginia. So, there's that access here. The problem is for indigenous people, they don't have the same access to that as other people because of the restrictions kind of associated with identity and tribe, and because of previous discrimination, and because the police also don't want to get involved in something that is the indigenous community's problem and not their problem. The indigenous women together decide that they're going to stand up and not take this anymore, then that changes things, right? It is illegal in Paraguay at large to sell your child and so forth. So, as I mentioned, there's different groups of communities along that spectrum. There is a community a little further away that I'm probably not going to be working with at this point in time, where the sexual abuse of children is a ritual thing. It's the shaman's job to, that's their thing. And that there's other communities like the one that I'm going to tomorrow that they're closed off, and that's not what the shaman does. But what the shaman does is act as kind of a cultural protector. And the sexual abuse that happens in those cases happens because the kid gets sold, or because the, just normal kind of like what happens in any poor community sexual abuse when you think about like a similar to like how it would be in the United States. So that community, it becomes like they have the right when a kid reaches 9 to 12 or whatever, and the community has the right, and outsiders don't have the right to tell them anything about that. And that's a big challenge. So it's a whole spectrum of challenges because each community is so different. I mean, here in Paraguay, there's at least 10 different other languages in addition to the majority Guarani. So you're talking about different languages, different cultures, and, different needs. So the one tomorrow, there's a lot of restrictions The teachers who come there to teach Guarani and Spanish and have a school for the kids have to be careful, because the shaman will walk around the outside of the classroom to listen, to make sure that they're not saying anything that's culturally not allowed or spiritually not allowed. The aid workers here are Presbyterian missionaries. Actually, I think they might be some other denomination, but they're missionaries, and they have to be really careful because there's a lot they're not allowed to say. Versus the community yesterday, like, they did a Bible lesson in Guarani, like that's what they do. They're Paraguayans who are sharing what they believe with other Paraguayans, and it's considered fine. But the indigenous people in the community we're going to tomorrow are not allowed to have different beliefs. You have to have the same belief that the shaman has. You're not allowed to hear what other Paraguayans say or believe. You have to believe what the shaman believes. And that's pretty restrictive and pretty intense. And so if you are people who believe in things like prayer or quote-unquote spiritual warfare and stuff like that, that's an area that could be prayed for. And if you're not, even from a secular perspective, it is so important that kids are allowed to be educated to have choices. And you can see where it's like not having the right to have the choice over your own body is also similar to not having the right to have the choice over your own beliefs, right? Where you have to believe what the community says, and you have to do what the abusing family member says you have to do. So the goal isn't to make them leave their communities. The goal is to give them autonomy and tools so that they face less discrimination, so that children have the right to say no for their bodies, and so that people can, have the right to know love, right? And from certain perspectives to be allowed to know that God loves them and isn't mad at them and scary, which is kind of a big deal if you come from a belief system where that's not the case. So, I think a lot has to be done with quiet listening and with service more than anything. And that's where my angle, because I am a physician, tends to be more scientific and more medical. I really see where bringing mental health and sexual health support could be a huge deal for just, making sure that people have the ability to choose things that are healthy for them, and that they can be happy and they don't have to be tortured. So, but that's all very long term. Right now, tomorrow, it's going to be to try to listen, to try to get better at Guarani, and see if they're going to give me permission to teach a health martial arts class. I would be so happy if we can empower indigenous people with beliefs, with sexuality, with anything like that. The victim, the sufferer, has to, you can't come in and control how they do things, you can't. Now, obviously when there's a crime, like if I find out there's a crime, then we still report it to the Paraguayan police, that's the job. But the problem is that if you don't start with first things first, the victim themselves won't speak up with you. They'll keep it a secret, or if they do, they might be convinced to back down because they don't think they're worth fighting for. And that happens a lot in the United States also when you come to sexual assault. People get retaliated against and then they shut down. And so then the abuser gets to continue abusing people because the abused are too scared to say or do anything. And that has to be a personal decision. It has to be their decision because they could get killed in the United States or here. An abused person who speaks up could be killed. So first things first, you have to empower the victim. You can provide forensic services, you can provide medicines and things like that. But if you haven't empowered the people to take it for themselves, it means nothing. It's just like if you give a diabetic insulin and they never take it because they don't understand that their diabetes is going to kill them, right? The personal autonomy, it's a big deal. So start with that. That's the most important thing that's going to make long-term change. Because then, that person can then educate their child and so forth. And that way also you don't lose culture, because we can be wrong about things too. There are things that we do that I believe are morally wrong, right? You don't know what you can't know. So how do I know if there's something that I'm doing that I'm blind to that is as horrible as something like that? Hopefully I'm not doing anything that horrible, but we often don't know. I mean, for a while in the United States, race-based slavery was considered normal and okay, and that was horrible. So morality is a big deal. And we have to be intelligent about that. So it's very difficult to be then, therefore, a second-class citizen in a second-class citizen group, because people don't want to mess with you. So that's kind of the long-term plan. Short-term, next week I'm bringing my ultrasound machine to the community I visited yesterday, and I'm going to help a lady to see her baby because she's about 5 months pregnant and she wants to see her baby's face. We're not going to do anything medical because they're all uncomfortable with doctors and I'm not licensed here. We're just going to look at the baby so she can see what her baby's face looks like, and that's going to be a kind of way to show love and encouragement. I'm taking my Guarani classes every day, every week. I'm supposed to be studying every day. That was funny today also because when the grandmother came over, she used the word pu or pu something else. But pu can mean stomach. So the person who translated to me said that they thought her stomach hurt. And so if I could go look at the girl because her stomach hurt, it wasn't her stomach, it was her foot. She'd burned her foot because the word in Guarani for foot is pu. And we're walking along the way and the grandmother is speaking to me in Guarani the entire time. And my Guarani is very, very, very bad, very terrible. I am learning. I don't even know how to say I am learning. I know how to say like, Shehera Jennifer. Like, this is my name, what's your name? Right, so really basic baby stuff I know how to say.
This is the avocado tree. The other one's a lemon tree. It still makes me happy though that the lemon tree is being taken care of. But this is my avocado tree. There were some dying leaves at the top and so it looks like they snapped those off to take care of it, which is also encouraging. This is the community. This is what the indigenous community looks like. This is my buddy Jose Diego, who always walks with me and helps me out, and he's a good friend.
Hola.
Sí, muy buen amigo. And then this is the community. Estoy grabando películas pequeñas para mostrar a la gente cómo está la comunidad. This is where the leader lives of the community. This is where one of the other young ladies live. I don't know whose house that is. That house is not part of the community. The community all live in small houses like this one, like this wooden house here. And you can hear a kid coughing over there. And then through the trees you can see another small house over there on that side. You can see there's a lot of animals walking around. Sometimes it's kind of difficult to figure out what to do with the environment. People who are hurting often, you know, and the environment ends up being hurt around them too. So, but it's a community of people who are wonderful and who I would like to be a part of helping in some small way if I can. So. It is currently the rainy season in Paraguay, which is their winter. So sometimes it'll be pretty cold and sometimes it'll be super wet and rainy, which is a big problem if you happen to live outside.
So technically the indigenous people in the area have like
Homes to be under, but it's still, you know, fortunately it's not so cold today. But a huge disadvantage they have is folks like the indigenous people who chose to stay near there's a church in this area that provides some support for the people, and indigenous people who chose to stay in the area don't really get any government aid, whereas there is a reservation that was set up a little further away where indigenous people can go. The problem is some indigenous groups don't want to go there. There's a lot of really tight control on what they're allowed to do and believe. So that group there, you have to agree with the belief system of the shaman, and you're not allowed to talk about certain things. And so there are certain people among the indigenous communities who want to have a little more freedom to explore their own beliefs and needs. And some people have more access to work in this area, so they don't want to go live on the reservation. They want to stay near here, but they don't really have support for that. It would be interesting if one day there could be like a private like indigenous support organization here in this area that would allow people to have a little more freedom to, you know, be who they want to be. So I don't know, it's interesting, but it's really rainy today, and down where they are it's really, really muddy too. So, the rain is beautiful here, look. Well, I guess you can't really see it. It's really beautiful. Do you think that's something we could do? Like sometime put together like a career center where indigenous people can come and get support for the careers and stuff that they want, and maybe be able to stay in this area instead of having to go somewhere far away when they've already been pushed off their land multiple times And this isn't their land. The land where they're staying right now, this group here inside of the isla, belongs to somebody else who kind of lets them stay there. But they're basically at the whim of this property owner. Like, anything could happen and they could be sent away. And abused people often don't take care of the environment. Abused people sometimes hurt the environment. So there's a lot of trash that gets put around the indigenous community, partly because they don't have anywhere else to put it. There's not like there's a garbage people that come and collect. Garbage collection costs money and they're not going to afford that. So, you know, with the poverty, trash ends up building up in the area where they live. And so if that property owner decides at some point that they don't want them there, then they're going to be in trouble. And there is sometimes an anti-indigenous like conversations, at least in the kind of conversations that I've heard, with some assumptions about who they are and what they can do, or people who see them as a nuisance. So I don't know, it'd be neat if sometime in the future we could put together some kind of like support, emotional support, and like career center or something that's in this area that includes places where people could stay and, you know, not have to have that kind of fear. It's hard because, you know, with people who can't pay for land or can't pay a rent or something like that, and that wasn't their initial society, their initial society was a squatter society, it becomes kind of difficult to figure out within the modern paradigm how to make sure that they're able to live in a way that fits with their culture. So it's kind of confusing and complicated, and I wish that I was bigger and that I understood more things. So I need to study more so that I better understand what ways we can be